Good morning, colleagues. We've just formed a quorum. As for the agenda of the Establishment Subcommittee meeting today, we're going to continue with the three outstanding items left over from the meeting on the 7th of January. I'd like to remind members that if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest related to any of the agenda items, in accordance with Rules of Procedure, paragraph 83A, please disclose the nature of the interest before you speak. And you should also pay attention to paragraph 84 of the ROP in relation to voting requirements for direct pecuniary interest. Agenda item number 1, proposed retention of 2 supernumerary posts of 1 principal government engineer D3 and 1 administrative officer staff grade C D2 in the Home Affairs Bureau for 4 years from the 1st of April 2015 to continue monitoring the implementation of the West Kowloon Cultural District project. Is paper EC 2014-15-13. As I've already introduced the officials at the last meeting, I won't introduce them again today. The administration has already submitted a supplementary paper to this subcommittee, which has already been distributed to members under paper ESC 40-01 on the 21st of January. Does any member wish to speak on this supplementary paper? If not, I'll now put the item to the vote. Will those in favor of the proposals in paper EC 2014-15-13 please raise their hands? Oh, we don't have a quorum, so we'll call the quorum first. Yes, please ring the quorum bell. Yes, we'll call a quorum.
quorum.
Yes, we've already formed a quorum. Connie, yes, all right. I'd like to repeat that we're now on paper EC 2014-15-13. Mr. Leung, you just arrived. I'd like to ask whether or not you have any further questions on this issue about post-creation for WKCD. I'll now put the item to the vote. Will those in favor of the proposals in paper EC 2014-15-13 please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I'm of the view that the majority of the voting members are in favor of the item. The item is endorsed. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, paper EC 2014-15-14. proposed retention of a supernumerary post of Administrative Officer Staff Grade C D2 in the Narcotics Division of the Security Bureau for 3 years up to the 16th of February 2018 to sustain the efforts in combating drug abuse. On the 4th of November 2014, the issue was discussed in the security panel of this council. In attendance today for this item with Mrs. Erica Hui, Commissioner for Narcotics, and Ms. Mandy Wong, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security. As Mr. Him, Chairman of the Security Panel, is not a member of the subcommittee and is not able to attend this meeting, in accordance with the information prepared by the clerk, I'd like to briefly go through the salient points discussed by the panel on security. On the 4th of November 2014, the panel on security discussed the proposal. Some of the members supported the administration's proposals, but there are also opposing members. In principle, the panel did not object to the tabling of the item in front of the subcommittee. Some members asked whether the work of the Narcotics Division would be affected if the item is not endorsed. Other members were of the view that the structure of the Narcotics Division should be reviewed so as to turn the post into a permanent post. Any questions on this item? If so, please press the request to speak button. Mr. Poon Siu Ping and Mr. Chen Chi-chun would like to speak. 4 minutes per member. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chairman. In principle, I support the retention of the post. Of course, just now you mentioned that we did ask why the post was not converted into a permanent post so as to sustain the work on combating drug abuse. As for the pilot scheme for schools, in the year 2014, 71 schools participated. Are they all in Taipo District or in other districts as well? Later, on this scheme, what progress or arrangement will there be in future? Mrs. Hui, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Why don't we convert the post into a permanent post? Internally, we prudently review our work direction. In the past few years, in fact, in the Narcotics Division, we have a PAS post, which had been converted into a permanent post. This is to reflect that our anti-narcotics effort would be sustained to do our work well. In fact, we can see that of the duties of the 2 PAS posts, some are time-limited. For example, the legislative proposals were of the view that these tasks, upon completion of the exercise, should be reviewed to see whether it is necessary to retain the PAS posts. If there are new developments in future, we'll seriously consider that option. As for the pilot scheme in schools for 2013-14 or 2014-15, 71 schools have participated in the scheme. In the past few years, we gradually implemented the scheme in schools. As this is a school-based scheme, to promote the anti-narcotics culture in schools, we're sustaining it. The participating schools are distributed in different districts. Now we're inviting schools to submit applications for 2015-16. As the scheme has been in place for 4 years, including this year, next year we'll have an independent assessment to see where we can make further improvements so as to formulate the way forward. Do you have any objective for 2015-16? How many schools would you like to have? Commissioner, we don't have a set figure. We welcome all interested schools to join. In fact, we are proactively visiting different schools and school sponsors in different districts to promote the project. Mr. Peng Xiuping, any more questions? No. Next, Mr. Chen Chi-chun. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning this supernumerary post, one of its most important duties is to implement this community test schemes, a mandatory scheme. In fact, in the security panel, views were very divided. Basically, we had huge doubts on the project. Here, I'd not like to spend time on the details. Now, this post is mainly to study and implement the project. I have a question for the Commissioner. For this mandatory community scheme, this program, what's the latest progress? After completing consultation and reporting to us, when will it be implemented? Will you definitely implement it in terms of distribution of duties? How much will be for this particular program? We'll say if there are supporting and opposing views and you're going to shelve this project for the time being, will there not be enough work for this particular post? Commissioner, for this PAS post, it is to cover a number of salient areas.
And the most important task of all is to review with various sectors and disciplines the way forward. In the future years, we see room to deepen our services so that we can deepen our work in drug treatment and rehabilitation and to make our work more effective and sustainable. And it's also important to help drug treatment and rehabilitation centers to obtain licenses. We have got 15 organizations which need our help to identify the direction forward. It is important that we have a dedicated officer at an appropriate level to help. And there is also the promotion of a healthy school campus, because this is very important. When it comes to prevention, it is important that we start to build a healthy culture in school. Regarding the rescue drug testing scheme and its public consultation, the reason why we proposed this public consultation is, in the past few years, we have seen how much work we have done in prevention, enforcement, education, and publicity. For new reported cases, the duration they have been on drugs has shown us a very worrying trend, and many of them already have serious physical conditions or medical conditions. This is an opportunity for us to discuss with different sectors and disciplines to see what more on top of what we're doing we can add. If drug addicts can be identified early, then they can be treated earlier. It's just like prevention of diseases. If we can identify the drug addicts earlier, there are bound to be advantages. And there is no question of we must implement this scheme whatsoever. We will only start the second round public consultation and implement it when we have specific proposal that receives support from different sectors. Ms. Ito, I'd like to ask about the licensing arrangements for drug rehabilitation and treatment centers, because starting from 2008, you've started discussing with the industry on this matter. Yet, as today, there are still a number of institutions not licensed or unable to obtain licenses. These organizations very much want to improve their facilities. For instance, we have visited some of these centers, and there they didn't even have a hot water supply in winter, and the treatment. The patients had to use cold water for shower in the winter, and for some of them, for isolation treatment during the first few nights of admission, some of the inmates were put in a container and had no electricity supply, and when there were thunderbolts, it was really dangerous. So these institutions really want to improve their facilities and be licensed. It's not that they don't have the will. Some of them have got money but unable to do it. So how come these institutions are not yet licensed? It's not that you want them to move, and it's not that their facilities are dangerous and you want them to close down. You need their services. How come these resources cannot reach these institutions after so many years so that they can provide treatment and rehabilitation services in a better environment? Thank you, Ms. Ho, for your question. Ms. Ho referred to the situation she saw while visiting these places, and I think that's support for us to do more. So we share your concern. We want to do something for them. In 2008, we had 40 such institutions, and 24 of them were not yet licensed. And as at 2014, we've got 39 such centers because 2 of them have merged, and 24 already covered with licenses. Different centers have different target clients, and therefore we should try our utmost to help them to get licensed. The challenges were much more than we expected, because they had to face different challenges, and we will try our best to help. Regarding resources, when the Finance Committee approved funding for the Beat Drug Fund, one of the conditions, or rather, it had given us more flexibility to help R and T centers to be licensed. The problems they face are whether they can identify the right premises, and also difficulties with works. Chairman, I do understand that there are many difficulties, but it's been 8 years since 2009 or 2008, so it's unacceptable. Can the administration give us an undertaking? 2 years down the road, all the remaining centers can be properly licensed. In the past few years, we've held 7 centers to obtain licenses, and in a few years, we have planned improvement works, and we will continue to move along this line. Mr. Wuchiwai, the paper stressed that this post is time limited, and there will be another review after 3 years to see whether it is necessary to keep the post. So, can the Commissioner share with us the various programs mentioned in the paper? When will these programs be completed? Can you give us a time frame? And secondly, the work of this PAS, well, according to para 31, implement recommendations arising from the Financial Action Task Force against money laundering. I was thinking that this post has to do with education and improvement to treatment and rehabilitation facilities. I thought his duties don't include this one. And then we also got the healthy school campus scheme, the healthy school program with a drug testing component. In the district council, we have similar programs, jointly run by welfare organizations and schools in the district. I'd like to know whether whether you intend to make it an independent body, so that we know whether the duties to be carried out by this PAS will run on its own without the existence of this post. Yes. For assistance to TNR centers, this is actually ongoing work. It's just that we have to review what we've been doing with the centers, and this task is now shared between two PASs. We hope that after they have completed their time-limited duties, we can conduct a further review of their duties and responsibilities and manpower need. As regarding the recommendations of FATF, the purpose is to crack down on money laundering from drug trafficking. However, now the focus has been shifted to monitoring and implementation. So the coordination role is now being shifted to the FSNTB. However, there are enforcement work still related to ours. For instance, for people carrying a large amount of cash into Hong Kong, we need to help in this area of work. And as for a healthy school program, we have to conduct a review next year. Of course, our work in schools will continue. It will not stop. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, Chairman, I'd like to ask how come these time-limited posts always have a duration of 3 years and not 2.5? Because the CE has a term of 5 years. In fact, CY Leung, the CE should also should be made into a supernumerary post for 3 years. Since he obtained his position by lies, I think his post should be a supernumerary one. So my question is, why always 3 years? What justifications do you have for the duration of a time-limited post? For instance, you may say that because of money laundering of proceeds from drug trafficking, it is now the duty of the FSTB. So why 3 years? Do they think that they need your help for 3 years before they can handle the problem? Or rather, Or rather, you want to give them help for 3 years? Commissioner, the proposal of 3 years is because we have considered the workload of the PAS. Of course, there are things that that have to be dealt with as a routine, but there are other things that we need enough time for them to be effective. For instance, assistance to TNR centers, according to experience, right from the identification of site to commencement of works, considerable time is needed. And every 3 years, we'll discuss with the TNR sector to formulate a 3-year plan. The future plan will cover 2015 to 2017. So, after we have formulated the plan, we will have to engage stakeholders and related sectors. And for Healthy School Program, as I said, we're going to conduct a review in the next year, and before we decide on the way forward. So, if we are to keep this post, we must allow enough time for the PAS to carry through its work. And we also need to have a regular review of our distribution of duties, so we can only decide on the direction after the 3-year review.
You mentioned a great deal of cross-boundary money laundering activities, including cash. Are you of the view that the problem can be solved in 3 years or otherwise? Well, drug treatment and rehabilitation is for the long term, and you continuously have to identify suitable sites for these centers. So why do you set 3 years as the time limit? You said that you continuously have new tasks, so you have to collaborate with the institutions. Shouldn't this be something permanent? Are you saying that in future you won't have any work to do in this regard? Commissioner, just now I explained that in the past few years, for one of the PAS posts, it had already been converted into a permanent post. We have room to review our short-term tasks. If such tasks are completed, we can review our manpower level. In fact, we may be able to delete this post, or if we have sufficient justifications to make the post permanent, we're prepared to consider that. Dr. Fernando Chang, Mr. Chairman, whether this should be a permanent or supernumerary post, I've always had doubts. Mr. Chairman, I repeatedly looked at the paper here and discovered that for this PAS post, it has to assist the DTRCs to obtain licenses, to develop new modes of operation, take, for example, new treatment methods, to enhance the probation services and the Pioneer Project for the youth drug abusers, to take the lead among decision-making bureaus and departments, as well as interdisciplinary efforts. Well, all these tasks are ongoing, but you are now setting a time limit to this post. Well, this was a newly created post 5 years ago. 5 years have passed, and you are now asking for an extension of 3 years. Mr. Chairman, I really can't see why there should be a time limit. Long hair just now asked why 3 years? Why is it that you think you can complete these tasks in 3 years' time? I find this question difficult to answer. Well, these tasks are important. From my viewpoint, the government should do these work. You must assist the DTRCs to obtain licenses. You should, as soon as possible, make sure that they observe the licensing conditions. You set licensing conditions statutorily because you would like our DTRCs to attain a certain standard. Now, after so many years, as Ms. Sito said, you've still not completed your tasks. I've never queried the need for the post. The difficulty is you've been extending and extending this post. You've been extending it for 8 years already. Now you're telling us that you can complete the tasks in 3 years' time. From the paper, in the next 3 years, the major tasks including continuous anti-narcotics work, deepen the treatment and rehabilitation services, and so forth. I can't see how these tasks will end. Can you give us some specifics? Can you tell us whether there are certain specific plans that will be completed within a certain time frame? If so, we may be able to terminate this post, but we don't see this. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Fernando Cheung asked whether this post should be permanent or supernumerary, whether it's for short-term tasks. Within our anti-narcotics efforts, there are 5 major areas: publicity and education, drug treatment and rehabilitation, law enforcement, and so forth. Overall speaking, this post should be a permanent post. Having said that, we can see that our anti-narcotics work has been experiencing changes. We've progressed. Take, for example, we saw improvement in terms of drug treatment and rehabilitation for youths. What about the resources we put into different sectors of the community? Can we pass the resources to some other areas so as to enhance our achievements? Well, these are important issues to deliberate on. For rehabilitation services and treatment services, we see room for improvement on the basis of our existing achievements. Some of the work of the 2 PAS posts include legislation and law enforcement. After implementation, law enforcement departments and licensing departments like the SWD will be engaged in ongoing tasks. As for assistance to be offered to institutions, we are now playing a role. In the long run, we can study the need of this PAS post to see whether we need to retain it. In the past, well, this post has been in existence for 5 years. We would like to give it another 3 years so as to produce results. Next, Mr. Alan Leong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The position of the Civic Party remains the same as at the last term. That is, we oppose a mandatory test regime. The reason is that the government should have sufficient ancillary measures and services, and there have not been sufficient resources for drug treatment and rehabilitation. Before me, some colleagues have already asked why this PAS post is still a supernumerary post to be extended for another 3 years. This precisely indicates that in terms of assisting drug abusers and in terms of sufficient support, the administration is not determined enough. It is not dedicated enough. Just look at the number of DDRCs waiting for a license, then you understand the whole problem. I've gone through the administration's paper. Yes, of course, at the moment, if we extend the supernumerary post by 3 years, one of the major tasks of this post is to offer assistance to the DTRCs to continue to implement the rescue drug testing scheme. For the civic party, there is a conflict here. As I said, we've been consistent with our position. Apparently, there are conflicts here, thus creating huge difficulties for us. Here, I'd like to say something. We did contact the persons responsible for some of the DTRCs. According to their opinion, the existing PAS has been performing well and should be commended. I hope that the incumbent PAS has heard me, and I'd also like to put this on record. Paragraph 27 of the paper describes the PASN2 as that this is only one of the duties of the post. And just because of this single duty, we should allow this extension. However, the rescue drug testing scheme is very controversial in our community. I'd like to see whether the commissioner can give us supplementary information to put on record that under what circumstances the rescue drug testing scheme will not be mandatorily imposed on our community. Commissioner, I'd like to thank the honourable member for his recognition of the work of our colleagues. That is one of our important tasks. Let me say something about the consultation exercise. When preparing and going through the consultation exercise, all along we understood the controversy. That's why we have to keep in ample communication with the stakeholders. After completing the last consultation exercise, we still continued with consultation. If there are strong opposing views, particularly within the sector, we definitely would consider those opposing views because support from the sector is important. We'll duly consider members' views as well. We'll also explore what other alternatives we have to tackle this very serious drug abuse problem. Of course, we won't mandatorily impose it on the community because without the support of the sector, it won't work. Next, Mr. Leung Yiu-chung. Mr. Chairman, when the Commissioner answered Dr. Fernando Cheung's questions, I found her answers vague and ambiguous. I don't know whether or not she'll come back in 3 years' time to ask for another extension. I don't actually see the way ahead clearly. She mentioned deepening and implementing the existing programs and schemes. Well, next time when she comes again, she will repeat the same areas. Say if you're constructing a building, you have 2 more stories to go. You now ask for an extension of the post so as to complete the outstanding 2 stories. Then you have indicators for us. But here, you are not telling us the time limit. We don't know what criteria we should adopt to inspect this post. Take, for example, the licensing work. You don't give us a standard. You will continue with the outstanding institutions. You have to tell us the specifics. Tell us by what time these tasks will be completed, such that our colleagues clearly know what you want. I have no intention of suspecting the 2 members for filibustering. I'm not criticizing them because just now Mr. Alan Leung commended those 2 incumbent civil servants. But you have to set indicators for them. Without indicators, it won't work. One of your remarks just now was strange. You said that with these 2 posts, there have been improvement among youths. But if you look at paragraph 14 of the paper, the situation has actually deteriorated. So where's the improvement that you mentioned? You said that with these 2 posts, more anti-narcotics objectives can be attained. But please give us specifics. Don't speak in a vacuum. You must not be so abstract and ambiguous. Commissioner, we actually said that the 2 PAS posts cover our long-term anti-narcotics work. But for anti-narcotics work, at different stages, we need to take into account the trends relating to drugs and so forth. 1 PAS won't be able to take up the whole workload, so we need 2 PAS posts. We believe that the 2 colleagues involved will be able to complete their work in a few years' time. Then we can review the duty lists of the 2 colleagues to see whether or not certain duties can be combined. At this juncture, I really can't tell for sure whether we still need this PAS post because we don't see the future direction at this juncture.
Chairman, still my question hasn't been answered. I'm not asking her to make a decision now, but can you give us some indicators to assist you to make that decision? Otherwise, it's hard for me to judge what will happen to the post after 3 years. For instance, if you would like to enact a new piece of legislation and once it is enacted, then your work is completed. That is very clear. So can you be more specific and don't be so abstract as to tell us that you have to wait and see and conduct a review after 3 years? So, Commissioner, to be more specific, 3 years afterwards, what are things in this PAS portfolio that may be completed that will help you to decide how to consolidate the portfolio of this PAS so that there can be trimming? And can you tell us what are the tasks that might be completed in 3 years' time under this portfolio? Well, for drug treatment and rehabilitation, we have put in $148 million in recurrent expenditure and also money under the B-Drug Fund. We are now seeing how we can better utilize the resources. And in the coming 3 years, we will look at this. That is under the 3-year plan on DTRS. And then we also have to continue this dialogue with the sector. Of course, in 3 years' time, we need to come to a conclusion, and that is the conclusion of our public consultation. I cannot preempt the conclusion now, but for sure, this is also related to how we are going to formulate a 3-year plan. And after this is completed, the other PAS may see some of the legislative work under the FATF, and then we have to redistribute the workload of the 2 PAS, so we have to review the 2 PAS posts together. Thank you. Mr. Tan Kai Piu. Thank you. And I think the work of the Narcotics Division cannot be completed in 3 years' time, because even if the Narcotics Division has done a good job, the drug as a problem is not going to disappear, because unless you are talking about 1 or 2 special tasks, and after they are completed, you can delete the post. Members asked why it must be 3 years. Can it be longer or shorter? And have you considered making it a permanent post? And secondly, do you have any targets for these 2 PASs to complete in 3 years? For instance, for those DTLCs that are yet to be licensed, will you have any target to help them so that there can be outcome of the applications in 3 years' time, no matter whether it is a success or failure? And I think in 3 years' time, you should have made a decision on whether the rescue drug testing scheme should be implemented or not, or conditions, or with conditions. I think this post should be a permanent one, because we must not overlook the importance of this issue. So you must have some indicators for the work of this PAS in the coming 3 years. Commissioner, the licensing work of DTLCs, we can see difficulties in the way ahead. But some organizations have already got some preliminary ideas, and will continue to work the way through with these centers. In the coming 3 years, we may also have to review with other organizations. In the past few years, we have considered over 300 sites. Most of them were found not to be feasible. So if really I want to do it for all of the DTLCs, there are bound to be difficulties, but we will discuss with them very seriously. In addition to finding a reprovisioning site, we'll see whether there are other possible options. So in the coming 3 years, we'll do what we can. For the rest, we will continue to explore with them other possibilities. So this will be done in the coming 3 years. Regarding the public consultation on the rescue drug testing scheme, as I said, we don't have any specific timetable for implementation. But we attach a lot of significance to the exploratory process with various stakeholders to see whether we can come up with a plan or a scheme found to be acceptable, reasonable by different sectors, so that it can be launched for public consultation. So we do not have any timetable for implementation, but we really want to complete the public consultation in this 3 years. The 2 PAS posts, of course, have regular duties, but we are not an implementation, or rather we're not an enforcement department. There are enforcement agencies, and for licensing, there are Department of Health and SWD. Will you have any overall plan, or conduct a study on the number of DTLCs we need in the light of the number of drug addicts in Hong Kong? It is impossible for us to plan in terms of service provision, because we cannot predict the prevalence of drug addiction in the community. But for different types of services, we hope that we will have these services to cope with upcoming demands. I think we've been able to do this by and large in the past few years, and we are confident that for other areas of drug prevention work, we have seen some fruits. So we hope that other than satisfying the demand, we will be able to deepen our services as well. Thank you. Mr. Liu Chang-Kong or Mr. Martin Liu. Recently, we have seen a higher increase in some sectors of drug addicts. For instance, first-time reported drug addicts, those between 21 and 31, well, they are young people, young adults, and also there is also a higher population of new reported drug abusers who were at work. And the Narcotics Division has focused its prevention work in schools only, and there is room for improvement in other sectors. So what measures will be introduced to effectively help drug addicts who are not really school children? Commissioner, in our strategy, it is important to mobilize and engage the whole community. So fighting drugs in schools has been one of our priorities. And a healthy school program, the healthy school program is only part of our strategy. Because drug addiction is a very hidden problem. We've achieved some results in drug prevention among young people. Now, for those who are long-time drug addicts, they have left schools after a while. So regarding the figures quoted in para 14, a young adult aged between 21 and 30, the percentage of drug abusers in this category is on the rise. Because of our work and changes in society, the situation will change and we'll adjust our strategy accordingly. For instance, we attach a lot of significance to mobilize more sectors in the community to enhance public awareness. So we encourage NGOs to carry out prevention work in schools, and we've also done so in the community. One example is in the past 2 years, we had a trial scheme. We deployed resources to district fight crime committees, hoping that they would encourage their district organizations to do some work. For instance, to enhance parents' awareness and to enhance frontline workers' ability to identify possible drug addicts. This is to help early identification. We expect to continue to do this. And as for resources under the Beat Drug Fund, thanks to the support of LAGCO in 2009, we got additional funding for the fund to allow us to support different community organizations to implement useful drug prevention programs, and this we will continue to do. Thank you. Dr. Martin Liu, we're pleased to hear that you will continue with this plan. But before you do that, have you ever done any assessment of the plan to see whether it is really effective? Thank you. For instance, assistance under the B-Drug Fund, we do attach a lot of significance to its effectiveness. So we have colleagues to keep in touch with them to understand the implementation process. And the outcome of the work will be submitted to the ACAN to consult them. So there is a continuous plan. Second round, 4 minutes. Mr. Chen Chi-chun. Thank you. The Commissioner told us clearly the scope of work of this post. Now I see that the rescue drug testing scheme is now put in lower priority, and helping DTLCs to get licenses is now put in higher priority. I'd like to ask about the progress of the public consultation. The Commissioner said that it was not possible to preempt the conclusion, but what about a timetable? I think you should have a timetable for major milestones, such as when a decision will be made as to whether it will be implemented or not. I'd like to know the percentage of time the PS will devote to this area. Whether this scheme will go ahead will make a difference, because if it is still in a consultation process, then the time needed will be less. But if the decision is yes, then of course you may counter obstacles and objection, then more time will be needed. So if the answer is yes, then the future 3 years will mainly be devoted to this area. So whether this scheme will go ahead or not will make a major difference as to the relative workload of this post.
And there's a technical issue. The post will expire on the 16th of February. If we give you the green light today, will you go to the Finance Committee? Will you be able to beat the deadline of the 16th of February? Failing that, what will happen? What about the 16th of February, the CSP or the Deputy Secretary? The procedure is that the ESC will examine the details first, and then they'll go to the Finance Committee for the supernumerary post. There's an expiry date to this post. As Mr. Chen Chi-chun said, at the moment, the FC has approved funding for the post up to the 17th of February. If further funding is not approved by the FC by that date, the post will expire. Then the Narcotics Division will have to consider the way forward. Well, I'm asking a hypothetical question, which may happen. Well, what about queuing up with the FC? What will happen? Well, to the department, that would be very ideal. The situation will be very difficult. But if that is really to happen, the department will have to consider the relevant issues. Commissioner, well, just now, I did not have time to give you the progress and the timetable for the scheme. We understand that there are certain issues that are very sensitive attached to the rescue drug testing scheme. So we treasure our discussion and consultation with you. Well, the issues involved are complicated. The purpose of the scheme is not to take out prosecution against the persons concerned. We'd like to identify those persons and individuals that need drug treatment. So we'll discuss with the sector such that all parties concerned are convinced that this scheme will be able to attain its goal. So we have to do preparation work. So in terms of preparation and consultation, it will definitely take time. We cannot estimate the time frame, which will not be foreseeable. Here, communication on drug treatment and rehabilitation services should proceed concurrently with the tasks involved with the drug testing scheme. So we'll adopt a dual approach. Both will proceed concurrently. I'd like to clarify one issue. Mr. Chen Chi-Chin asked about that. Can you roughly tell us, for this post, how much time, can you give us a percentage, will be spent on the rescue drug testing scheme? Can you give us a rough estimate? Mr. Chairman, it is very difficult to have an accurate estimate. Roughly, for DTRS, in our discussion with the sector, that DTRS is to proceed concurrently with rescue drug testing scheme. Well, if I'm to take out consultation separately, I don't think that will exceed 30% of the overall time needed. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Mr. Chairman, we noted that PASN2 and PASN1 do have some duplication of duties. If you read the paper, PASN1 is to work on the drug abuse database, student surveys, surveillance, to assist the Commissioner for Narcotics on anti-narcotics effort. And then PASN2 is to assist with the DTRS for 3 years. Blah, blah, blah. Apparently, from the paper, there's a certain degree of duplication of duties. For these two PASS, why are you dividing the duties among two colleagues? PASN1 is duplicating with PASN2 on 1346. PASN1 is to assist in anti-money laundering activities, anti-drug trafficking efforts, and so forth. As the Commissioner said, some of these duties may be passed from the Security Bureau to the FSTB. For those tasks with no duplication, they involve licensing. I have two questions. First of all, for licensing, just now our colleagues asked what specific difficulties you have, and are you confident that you can complete the tasks in 3 years' time? What's your assessment? As for PASN1, for anti-money laundering work, anti-drug trafficking work, and so forth, if such duties are passed to Professor Chan Ka-keung's FSTB, then much of the duties of this post will be taken away. I want to clarify the lists of duties for the two posts. In the paper, you said that you've already considered that. But we have difficulties because from the paper, the two posts are very similar. Commissioner, For anti-narcotics work, we've been adopting a 5-pronged approach. For the Narcotics Division, our most important work is prevention, education, and legislation, as well as drug treatment and rehabilitation services. We have huge quantities of work under those categories, under those 5 categories. As for specific measures, our work is evidence-based. Therefore, in terms of data collection, analysis of drug trends, regular 3-year survey on all the students of Hong Kong and so forth, well, all these are under PASN1. After obtaining the information, it would be very important for publicity and education. It will also benefit DTRS, because with such information and data, we'll be able to map out our direction ahead. As for anti-money laundering, in the early days, there are money laundering activities resulting from drug trafficking. Well, in the early days, all these were put under the Narcotics Division. Later, as a lot of our work involved financing, the whole task was passed to the FSTB. Yet, there are law enforcement and legislation tasks. For example, we have to conduct a large-scale consultation exercise on the large cash flow across boundaries. So for these specific issues, for the examining of these issues, etc., I think they should still come under our Narcotics Division. As for finance matters, they should go to the FSTB. So I believe in the next 3 years we'll be able to see results, concrete results. In the next few years, we'll discuss with the stakeholders whether or not we can have alternative directions. But as of today, it is premature for me to forecast anything. Mr. Yu Si-wing speaking for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this supernumerary post. At the meeting of the panel on security, I also suggested that it be converted into a permanent post that will directly benefit our anti-narcotics effort. The question now is, if before the 17th of February, no further funding is forthcoming from the FC, what will happen? Do you have a backup plan? If not, to what extent will our anti-narcotics efforts deteriorate? Commissioner, I'd like to thank Mr. Yu for his support. We would, of course, like to have ways and means to get further funding. Therefore, we would very much like to have the support of the LegCo. So, we would like to solicit support in this subcommittee and later in the Finance Committee as expeditiously as possible. Failing this effort, we'll see what we can do. We'll try to avoid major adverse impacts. Mr. Yu Si-wing, Well, Commissioner, you would like to avoid any adverse effects, but still there'll be adverse effects if you don't get further funding for the supernumerary post. So I'd like colleagues to support the proposals in the paper. Failing that, I believe the Narcotics Division should have contingency plans. Well, this is just a suggestion. You don't need to respond. Next, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Mr. Chairman, I of course understand that anti-narcotics tasks are important. But think about this. How do you treat smokers? You caused cigarette prices to rise. I was affected because I'm a smoker. So why don't you adopt the same approach for your anti-narcotics efforts? I think you have a problem of logic here. You say you should first discover the young drug abusers in schools such that they won't continue to take drugs. Do you know how cheap drugs are these days? You cause the price of cigarettes to rise so that people won't smoke, but you're causing drug prices to drop tremendously. We now have very cheap drugs. We know that most young drug abusers, including those in schools, were actually obtaining very cheap drugs from the mainland. We have a lot of cheap drugs from the mainland. In the past, the price of heroin dropped because there was this very large-scale operation to combat drugs. Suddenly, drug prices surged 100%, so nobody took drugs again. So why are you causing cigarette prices to rise, thus agonizing smokers? You also increase the wine tax so as to prevent people from dying from kidney diseases. Why is it that you are causing drug prices to drop? I don't see the logic here.
The part about money laundering is handed over to FSTB, and you're saying that because legislation and enforcement you're involved, and therefore you would like to advise them. In fact, it's none of your business. It's not your business. Do you know anything about money laundering? I think all you know is about catching drug addicts. Why is it like this? I don't know whether members who claim to support you have thought about this. I've never heard of a place where crackdown on drugs is weak and yet tries to find out the hidden drug addicts. We've given you money for so many years. You have got 7 new DTLCs, and you have identified so many more drug abusers. And so what? What do you intend to do for them? Mr. Leung, we have to agree that enforcement is a very important area of work in our strategy. We have not placed emphasis to it today because it is not under the portfolio of PASN2. However, we have 2 enforcement agencies, namely the police and the customs and excise, because drug is an international problem. So we stress the cracking down of drugs in Hong Kong, and these 2 agencies also cooperate with their counterparts overseas. They use intelligence-led approach to tackle the problem. These criminals are very versatile, and therefore we must enhance our people, especially young people's awareness of the harms of drugs, so that they know to make the right choice, and therefore we don't have to take remedial actions in the form of R and DTRS. So these are all intertwined. In 2014, the first 3 quarters, these 2 agencies have seized 730 kilograms of drug, compared with the same period in 2013, an increase of almost 40%. We understand that we cannot be complacent. We must ensure that drug traffickers will have no chance whatsoever. However, we have to continue to do prevention. Thank you. Mr. Albert Chan speaking for the first time, so I give you the floor first, because the Bills Committee on Columbia is going on in the next room. Now, usually the administration tends to extend time-limited posts. Most of the posts involve planning and works such as the WKCD, XLL, and Hong Kong Choi Macau Bridge major infrastructure projects. However, this post is about administration and management. This is hard to tolerate. When it comes to planning works due to the need of advanced works and also unexpected technical problems, and due to contractual reasons, the same post has to follow up. Otherwise, instead of paying $100 million, it may grow to $1 billion in compensation. Then we have to put up with it. But this is about administration and management of drug prevention. You want to extend the post. All departments and bureaus of posts have their portfolio and job duties. So you should decide on your distribution of duties according to your establishment. Now, this is just like a prodigal son. You don't care because the government has got money and you are used to squandering money. This is not the way to do it. I've been legislators for so long, and I think the abuse of supernumerary posts is at its most serious now. Perhaps it is the characteristic of C.Y. Leung. By transfer of interest and corruption, he wants to create new posts, new undersecretaries such as the ITB. And because we have more supernumerary posts, senior officials may like him better. Now, Chairman, in this ESC, you can see most of the papers here in the past year involved extension of supernumerary posts. The abuse is unacceptable. So I strongly urge the Audit Commission to conduct a study on the abuse of supernumerary posts by the administration. I'm going to write a letter to the Audit Commission to conduct a study, because many questions cannot be answered in this committee, such as the navigation system by aviation CAD. We asked so many questions that made frontline headlines on front pages of newspapers. Ultimately relied on the Audit Commission to find out how the office area exceeded the standard by over 10,000 square feet. So this is not just with this bureau. The abuse of supernumerary posts by the whole administration is unacceptable. Well, whether the administration like to answer or not is up to it. I will vote down this paper anyway. The administration, the speaker is not coming through. Chairman, The vetting process of supernumerary posts and permanent posts are just the same. They have to go through ESC and also FC. We are very cautious in considering the need of new posts. Whether it should be a permanent or supernumerary post, it depends on the nature of duties. As far as this post is concerned, as explained by the Commissioner, they have taken into account fully the time frame and also the duties involved, and they have decided to go for a supernumerary post. Can our Secretariat help the number of supernumerary posts sought by the administration in the past year? Perhaps a comparison table be drawn out with past years so that members have an idea how horrifying it has been in the rapid increase of supernumerary posts and also the money involved. For instance, give a table of the situation per year in the past 5 years, because the abuse in this year is particularly serious. Commissioner, any supplement? A simple reply. We have provided an extra $1.4 billion in recurrent expenditure for different services. This goes to show the government's emphasis on drug prevention. We want these resources to rationalize our service and deepen our services to make them more effective. In addition to the recurrent expenditure we get, there is also the B-Drug Fund. So our regular work is important. Our recurrent work is important. Ms. Ho. We will not oppose when the administration wants to enhance its prevention work in drug. Our query is how come these posts have been extended 3 years after 3 years, and yet the progress of work is so slow. For instance, I asked about upgrading of facilities for DTLCs and how come the progress is so low. And you've also got a lot of problem in identifying right locations for provisioning. When Siwala wants to achieve his desire, he can do it very expeditiously. But services urgently needed in the community, he can move so slowly. Now, you want to implement mandatory drug testing scheme. You wanted to use mandatory drug testing as a deterrent. However, social workers are already saying that in this way, you will be forcing people to take drugs secretly at home. And the duration of drug addiction is also on the increase for newly reported cases. So in 2008, it was 1.9 years. In 2014, it was 5.4 years of drug taking. I think this has proved or confirmed worries by social workers back then. When you have mandatory drug testing, you are forcing drug abusers into hiding. So what do you have to say about this statistics? So the concern or the projection of social workers turned out to be right. So how are you going to discuss with social workers to improve the situation? I'm worried that after your second round public consultation of the rescue drug testing scheme, the situation will worsen because you're only interested in finding out drug cases but not helping them. And there will be a greater demand for such services because mandatory drug testing would force them into hiding. So how are you going to discuss with social workers to cope with problems arising from your mandatory drug testing? Commissioner. For the licensing of DTLCs, this problem is serious. In the light of our cooperation with them in the past few years, these centers are not experienced in identifying new sites for reprovisioning. If there is no department to help them to coordinate and overcome problems, they will find it very difficult. Some of them have difficulties in finding the right provision for reprovisioning. There may be objection from the districts, and for other locations they may be too remote, and the soil conditions or the geological conditions may not be suitable. So it is important that we have a dedicated staff to help them to improve the situation. So we will continue to work along this run and see what else we can do. As for the public consultation on the rescue drug testing scheme, I want to stress that we do attach a lot of significance with discussions with the sector. The past few years, communication has helped us to identify the problems and how resources can be better utilized. This can be reflected in their funding services agreement. And as for the duration of drug addiction, it is important to note that most drug abusers have a lower motivation. When they are identified, usually they already have medical problems, and the duration of drug abuse has been rather long. So it is important to identify them before they have permanent physical damage. How can we achieve our purpose? We continue to stress that we need to maintain this dialogue with social workers. Views are diverse. There are social workers who believe that it is necessary to have another option, but we should work hard and continue with what we are doing now. Does any member wish to speak for the second time or again? Please press the button if you hope so. All right, Dr. Fernando Zhang speaking for second time. I give you the floor first. Dr. Zhang. Colleagues have been asking for the deliverables in the coming 3 years. So what this post can deliver after 3 years?
All along, we've not been able to grasp the specifics. So when we consider the supernumerary post, which has been in place for 5 years and is undergoing this exercise for an extension of 3 years, but we have not been able to obtain concrete replies. So I'd like to have more specifics from the Commissioner. Now, for the next 3 years, according to the paper, there will be enhancement and consolidation of rehabilitation services and treatment services. So for the deliverable here, there will be this 3-year plan for 2015 to 2017. Theoretically, you formulate the priorities and strategies for treatment and rehabilitation services in the next 3 years. So how are you going to enhance and consolidate your efforts on those fronts? We don't see these in the paper. Can we have the specifics from you? Commissioner, now we're talking to the relevant stakeholders on the directions in the next few years. We have to assist the DTRS to set up their services. They should also enhance the quality and quantity of their services on various fronts. As drug trends have slightly changed, in certain areas, the stakeholders had relayed certain issues to us. So in the next few years, we'll do a lot more coordination. Some institutions told us that many drug abusers have very low motivation for receiving services. So if we can start from the parents and the families, will have a higher chance of contacting these drug abusers such that they'll be willing to receive our assistance. In future, we'll have to discuss with the institutions and the departments concerned. We'll have to do coordination such that their efforts can be enhanced. As for follow-up services, very often when we discuss DTRS, we somehow feel that so long as we can successfully make a drug abuser receive our services, then we're successful. But there is this common phenomenon that there's room for further enhancement such that the efficacy of drug treatment services can be enhanced. For example, counseling services can effectively help drug abusers. Another example is vocational counseling. And then for the pregnant women, they have special needs. On that front, there's also room for enhanced appropriate services to enhance their motivation to turn to treatment and rehabilitation. So we'll try to make use of the strengths of the institutions to enhance the efficacy of our work. Next, Mr. Leung Yu Chung. Thank you, Chairman. I've heard the Commissioner many times that, well, actually she would like to tell us what she would like to do in the next 3 years. She would also like to convince us that this supernumerary post will be necessary for the next 3 years and there will be a review. Unfortunately, we've not heard of the specifics yet. Commissioner, before your proposal, whether or not your proposals are supported by us, would you please go back and work out more concrete details for us? That is, try to make your proposal concrete. We would like to have positive indicators from you. And then for the next 3 years, you mention inter alia, the service providers and service recipients, and you mention consensus. You need a directorate staff to take up all these tasks in the next 3 years. For example, to take a leading role, etc., etc. There's a whole list here. I have a friend who works in a methadone center. The observation is that the number of locals served by methadone centers is ever dropping, while the number of ethnic minorities, including South Asians, is ever rising. You mentioned communication with the drug abusers in your paper. Have you ever done that? Say, have you been communicating with the South Asian drug abusers? Can you tell us the experience of your staff members, as well as the training they receive? Commissioner, concerning our specific work, I can definitely go back and prepare a list for you. In the past few years, in our contact with the institutions, we also spotted that concern. Very often we provide our services through NGOs and other institutions which have networks in the community to come into contact with ethnic minorities. Some ethnic minorities have very close internal relationships. However, they may not be very open to assistance from outsiders. So I think we must try to enter their circles first and establish mutual trust. In the past, some institutions did obtain funding from the the BDF for programs. So we'll see how we can enhance our support services. As for training for our frontliners, that's also one of our major tasks. So we'll do something in that regard together with members of the sector. Will see how we can further enhance our work. Anyway, we're willing to enhance our effort. Well, can you queue up again? We have Mr. Chen Chi-chun speaking for a third time. 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. For the rescue drug testing scheme or any drug testing scheme, the Commissioner said that members of our society do want a more effective testing scheme. But many members of the public also reject a drug testing scheme, equating it to legislation for Article 23 of the Basic Law. Well, after the second round of public consultation, we heard nothing from you. So what are you actually doing? When will you explain to the public the progress of this phase? I'm not asking whether or not you're going to implement the scheme, but at least you have to tell us the latest progress. Don't just drag it on without giving us information for, say, 1 or 2 years. Well, I understand that many people are concerned about this, and precisely because of this, we have to be very careful with our studies. We have to look into the details. Now, what are we doing at the moment? After the last consultation exercise, we've kept in close liaison with members of that sector of the community. Well, this is a task embraced by all of us. So we'll see how we should handle the needs involved. First of all, about drug testing. How should we handle that? I understand that many friends of ours are very concerned about the powers of the police, human rights, and so forth. So we would like to identify solutions to address those concerns. Secondly, for those tested positive under a drug test, we must have follow-up action to make sure that our effort can effectively assist drug abusers to get rid of drug taking, drug addiction. That's why it's important for us to keep in close liaison with that sector of the community. In the social service sector, participation is important. That will be our focus. Issues involved are complicated. We don't want drug testing to result in unnecessary prosecution. So we have to handle prosecution issues, conviction records, and so forth. So roughly, that's the latest progress. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, the Commissioner has not answered my question. It doesn't matter. I just want to express my views. When will they explain to us the latest progress? According to the Commissioner just now, there's no set date yet. All right, then drop it for the moment. You should spend all your efforts on licensing. Then I'll feel comfortable in endorsing the proposals here. Commissioner, I don't have a specific timetable because I feel that we still need time for discussion. Discussion is important. We should try to see whether there are alternative ways and means. I cannot stop just because there are social concerns about drug testing. Anyway, the pretext is that we won't mandatorily impose it on society. We have Mr. Wu Chi-wai, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, and Mr. Sito on the list. They're speaking for the third time. Does any other member wish to speak? Please press your request to speak button. All right. So Mr. Wu Chi-wai first. 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I can see that concerning the supernumerary post of PASN2, the 3-year plan on drug treatment and rehabilitation services in Hong Kong will be covered in the duty list. Well, the plan has been in place in the past. Will you conduct a review or even an audit exercise on the plan? If you are to extend this supernumerary post, then at least this 3-year plan will continue for another 3 years, even though it may be on an experimental basis only. And then for PASN1, one of his duties has already been passed to the FSTB. That's the anti-money laundering duties. Well, historically, anti-money laundering might have been important, but when it comes to money, that is financing, the FSTB is to do the job. Now for PASN1, in the past, how much of his time was taken up by anti-money laundering work? And after those duties were passed to the FSTB, what duties will this post still have? Do we still need 2 posts, or is there a chance for consolidation?
Commissioner, well, for the plan between 2015 and 2017, this is already the 7th 3-year plan. The last one was from 2012 to 2014. And one of the important thing about the 3-year plan is in the 2 years after 2009, having completed a review of drug addiction among young people, resources were greatly increased to different organizations. So in the last 3-year plan covering 2012 to 2014, the majority of work was focused on, after adding resources, to help them to utilize newly added resources and how to consolidate different resources and to find out new ways of treatment. Because the abuse of psychotropic drugs is a relatively new trend. Commissioner, this supernumerary post first started in 2008, and before that, who took up that part of this duty? So this is a continuous thing. Is in the 7-year plan. Before the creation of this post, which post was responsible for this? In 2009, before the report by Mr. Wong Yan Long, the Secretary for Justice, there were 2 deputy secretaries in the Narcotics Division, responsible for drug prevention. However, as the problem deteriorated, there were cries in society that more resources should be put into this area. As a result of new resources, we created 2 new supernumerary posts to deal with the things arising from that development. Fighting drug is recurrent. So in 2012, we made 1 PAS post permanent. Prevention, publicity, and research have been taken up by that PAS. And for PAS2, we believe some of their duties can be time limited because we are not a department responsible for enforcement or implementation. Very often, implementation is done by NGOs and licensing work is done by another government department. We play the role of a coordinator because we have a strong awareness or understanding of the problem and with good information. So this change in manpower deployment has evolved with changes in time. I don't think you need to ask further because I will follow up in the next meeting. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, the whole thing is illogical. We may be challenged at FC. They want to start an Innovation and Technology Bureau, a new bureau. This is very different from what we have here. We are told that drugs involve many facets, and so much work has been identified, and therefore the work must go on, and we have the 7th 3-year plan coming. So this should be a permanent need, a recurrent need. You are spending more and more on this. How come this post is just supernumerary? For ITB, it's entirely different. It has grown out of the blue and is going to ask us for money, and it cannot be scrapped. Now, even mainland officials like to say that they can oversee accountable officers here, such as the Secretary for Education has been told off by someone in Beijing. So perhaps you should add a permanent DS or permanent PAS here. This is illogical. Why are you put in such a difficult position, Commissioner? Because the whole thing lacks no logic. Now, I think it is best for members here to blackmail you. Okay. You have the Healthy School program with a drug testing component. You say that in Taipo, my constituency, more and more schools have joined. And you want a mandatory drug testing in the community as well. Is that your plan? If so, you also got this rescue drug testing scheme. So once a case is identified, he must receive treatment and rehabilitation, otherwise he is doomed. Now, in fact, I am against mandatory testing. I'm just following your logic. Even if you're able to net all the drug abusers walking on the streets, you will be overwhelmed with the workload. Yes, your logic is correct. If a drug abuser can be identified earlier, then there won't be permanent damage to his health. If that's the case, following your logic, why should you want a permanent post? For ITB, I don't know what it is for, and yet is trying to get money from us. And once money is provided for that bureau, we cannot cut it anymore. So I am not going to give the green light for it. But for this PAS post, it is supernumerary. You should make it permanent. Now, we really have to allow Siwa Leung to continue with his second term. What is your question, Mr. Leung? I already asked the question. How come the administration is so crazy? Is crazy when it comes to disparity treatment of cigarettes and drugs. So what is your question here? Are we in Castle Peak now? We have put in a lot of recurrent expenditure for drug problem. We have provided over $1.4 billion in recurrent expenditure, and there are also resources from the big drug fund. So as time changes, we'll have to consider whether there is room for rational readjustment of the job duties of the two PS posts. Ms. Sitho, yes, we are concerned about abuse of police power, and we're also concerned whether this rescue drug testing scheme will be effective. Social workers are saying that you will just drive drug abusers to do it across the boundary, or to have drug rave parties at home so that they won't be so easily found by social workers. So if for first-time reported cases, the duration of drug taking has increased from 1.9 years to 5.4 years. This is exactly confirmed the prediction by social workers, and the commissioner has not answered my question about this increase in duration of drug abuse history as predicted by social workers. Now, if social workers' worries are now confirmed, that means your approach is wrong, and the situation will deteriorate further, even if we give you another 3 years of supernumerary posts. So next time when you come back, please give us a paper to explain how come the drug abuse history of newly reported cases has been on the increase. You have to find out the real problems before you can use the right solution. And as for the rescue drug testing scheme, DTLCs are not able to fulfill your necessary statutory requirements. And there is also the problem or the need for schools. Some young people may be discharged from DTLC. By then, they might have dropped out from mainstream schools for at least half a year or even longer. They need to go to these special schools for them, and it is found that school places are in short supply. And instead of providing more schools, the relevant authorities are trying to cut short the waiting list by asking people to leave the waiting list after they've been on it for more than a year. Now, if you are so miserly with your resources, it is useless, even if you are able to identify drug abusers. So please tell us the specific work targets or deliverables of this PAS post in 3 years. Please do not tell us, just tell us that the situation will worsen, because if the situation continues to worsen, that means this post will have to be extended forever. You must give us a quantifiable deliverables for the coming 3 years. Many colleagues have asked about the deliverable of this school, of this post, and also you can address the other questions by Ms. Sitho. Yes, we have said that for drug abusers, they usually have low motivation for receiving help. And frankly speaking, some early drug abusers don't see that they are in trouble. So usually earlier on, they have no consideration of receiving assistance whatsoever. And the characteristic is that as they have become a prolonged use of drugs, they don't have to do it with friends. They may come together in a small group, a small bunch, and abuse drugs in private places. And that is why it is difficult to identify them. By the time they come out for help, it's usually because they need medical help from doctors or social workers. So usually for newly reported abusers from NGOs, the drug abuse history is longer. And for law enforcement agencies, they are still able to identify early drug abusers that are still socializing with their friends, and their drug abuse history is usually shorter. So we want to use the rescue drug testing scheme to identify them earlier so that their physical health will not degenerate to such a state that it is beyond help. As for deliverables, we want to, Commissioner, this question has been asked by many colleagues. Perhaps you should give us a paper to give us some specific replies. Do you will extend this meeting for 15 minutes to allow Mr. Leung Yu-chung, or for 5 minutes to allow Mr. Leung Yu-chung to ask us questions? My question is simple. Please give us a list of the specific work to be done by these two colleagues. And you ask NGOs to help. I know many NGOs are helping ethnic minorities, but not on drug prevention or treatment and rehabilitation. Rather, they're just offering neighborhood assistance. Now, if they can help you in your work, then it can be so much more effective, because NGOs cannot penetrate into different sectors of the community. So please see how you can provide funding to different districts or in the community so that you can see some results.
Well, absolutely, we can include in the 3-year plan how are we going to strengthen our liaison with welfare organizations in terms of preventive services. So we'll do something more. Thank you very much. There may be other issues related to this paper, so I'd like to defer this paper for a continued discussion next Wednesday, the 28th of January at 8:30 a.m. We have a PWSC committee meeting, so we have to conclude here. Thank you.